Have you ever wondered how someone can vanish in the middle of the ocean, with thousands of people just a few decks away? Welcome to Mr. Nightveil. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true and chilling stories of passengers who disappeared or faced unimaginable terror while lost at sea. These are real cruise ship accounts that blur the line between logic and nightmare. So tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Hit subscribe and let's drift into the darkness together. My name is Daniel, and after what happened on the North Atlantic last spring, there's not a night I close my eyes without remembering how close I came to vanishing in the cold silence beneath the waves. This is what really happens when science edges too close to secrets that want to be left alone. I was 34, already with a reputation in marine biology for chasing the unsolved. This time, it was a privately funded research cruise. 9 days in the North Atlantic, tracking a fin whale migration with new sonar we'd only tested in the lab. The ship was stripped, practical, not luxurious. Low ceilings, corridors thick with cables, more metal than comfort. Crew quarters were scattered, with bunks nested like puzzle pieces. Our little team was all curiosity and caffeine, focused on data to feed careers back on land. Even by Arctic standards, the spring that year felt wrong. The fog that greeted us in the harbor never left, thick enough to blur the ship's bow even at noon. Wind moved it in curtains, sometimes so dense that sound seemed deadened, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. Every day had the same pattern. Set out buoys, check and recheck readings, tag a few whales if they breached near enough. We worked in rotating shifts, but I always volunteered for nights. I liked the way darkness amplified everything. The faint tremors of engines, the distant calls of whales through thick glass, and those moments, all alone, when you felt the ocean's sighs pressing in. Maybe you felt something similar when you're awake at 3 a.m., and the whole world seems to have forgotten you exist. It happened on my third night alone at the console. The sonar's usual song was interrupted, a sequence of pings, too clean to be background static, too precise to be nature. At first, I told myself it was an echo, maybe a school of squid interfering, but it didn't let up. Every 12 seconds, a sharp ping. On the screen, a return signal flickered deep beneath our hull, far past the usual depths of whales. I flagged the anomaly for the next shift, but the crew chief, tired and half listening, brushed it off. Maybe a glitch, maybe a sunken container. But that night, the pings got louder, closer, like someone knocking under the floorboards. My heart beat hard. I thought about waking the captain, but didn't. After all, what if I was just seeing things? Next night, the pings returned, but now the timing was irregular, teasing as if matching my heart. I adjusted the gain, tried every software filter, and watched as the radar's afterimage painted a shadow the exact length of our ship, keeping perfect pace, maybe 50 meters down. I told myself it was just a sensor echo, until my walkie crackled, static flaring, and then a single word: underneath. No one else claimed responsibility. Out on the deck, the fog was a wall. The ship's lights could barely touch it, more like the suggestion of light than light itself. Every surface was wet, cold to the touch. I stood at the aft rail, sonar unit gripped tight. I listened, not just with my ears, but with my whole body, the way you feel thunder before you hear it. Another series of pings, this time felt through my feet. Behind me, the interior lights flickered, then steadied. Goosebumps ran up my arms. I took a breath and tried to steady myself, but it felt like the ship was slowing, even though the engine's vibration told me we were moving at cruising speed. Have you ever had that moment when you're sure you're being watched, but there's no one in sight? That was what I felt. The sensation was so strong I turned, scanning the deck behind me, but it was just endless fog swallowing the stern. My radio was silent now, even though I could see the bridge through the misty glow, the faint silhouettes of 2 crewmen. No one looked my way. Driven by instinct, I returned to the console, scrubbing the data over and over. I noticed a pattern in the pings, distances representing the 3 dimensions around the ship, as if something was mapping us. The rest of my team was asleep. I couldn't shake the idea that someone, or something, needed me to know it was there, directly below our feet. The clock moved past 3 a.m. I made a decision, one I regret for its naivety. I'd go down to the lowest accessible deck, just above the hull, and listen. I descended stair after stair, passing machinery humming with latent energy, the air below decks hotter and stale. At the last bulkhead, a cold draft rose from the metal. My heartbeat kicked up. The pings had mutated, now a sequence that felt almost like a pattern, a message. I pressed my palm against the hull. It vibrated, almost imperceptibly, like a cat purring. "What do you want?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. But then a deep sound boomed, like a whale call, impossibly close, and the world went abruptly black. I woke with a taste of salt in my mouth, my body pressed against something cold and wet. For a moment I thought I was in the open sea, but the walls around me told a different story. Metal storage closet, the sharp stench of cleaning fluid, and my own lab coat soaked through. I staggered to my feet, skin clammy. My watch showed 2:19 p.m. I'd lost nearly a full day. My thoughts tumbled. Had I collapsed? Hallucinated? I checked my pockets for my data stick, found it. But the files were scrambled, data blocks replaced by strings of zeros. My first fear was that I'd been poisoned by leaking carbon monoxide. But the indicator badges all read normal. I checked my cabin. My bunk was made, my things arranged as I'd left them. But the logbook on the table had a rough, wet fingerprint drawn across the latest entry, one I didn't remember writing. "Don't look down." The crew acted like nothing had happened. The captain was polite but dismissive when I asked about any abnormal readings. "No record of problems," he said, "and you were present at breakfast this morning." Impossible. I remember nothing after the hull's vibration. The other team members teased me for spacing out. But when I pressed the issue, 2 looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. One quietly admitting she'd dreamt I came to her cabin door covered in seawater, whispering that it was hungry down there. She said she convinced herself it was just a nightmare. With every passing hour, the ship felt smaller and colder. I was paranoid, jumping at every metallic creak. I obsessively checked the sonar logs. Sure enough, during the window I was missing, the anomaly vanished. But right after I reappeared, a single ping registered, deeper and louder than ever before. I requested to review security footage, but the digital files for the lower deck had all gone blank during that same lost time. White static, then nothing. No explanation from the ship's tech. In the mess hall, I noticed the other scientists unconsciously stepping around where I stood, almost as if my presence disturbed them. One of the engineers started to avoid eye contact, and when he couldn't, his expression was full of a haunted kind of recognition. Fog continued to press in from all directions. Outside, the ocean's surface was as smooth as glass, so still it reflected the muted gray sky. One evening, when I thought myself alone in the research lab, the door creaked open and shut with no one there. My nerves were raw, Sleep came in jagged fragments, and the air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. That night, I heard the pings again, echoing faintly up from the depths, sometimes overtaking the metallic noises in my own bones. This was no malfunction. The next afternoon, I cornered the captain with my theory. Something was shadowing us. Something the sonar was picking up. And I'd lost time because of it. He listened, grave and silent. Then he pulled a crumpled slip of paper from a drawer, handed it to me. "Only show this to someone who's had the same experience," he murmured. On it was a log, dated 7 years prior, readings matching our current position. The final notation read simply, "Crew member went missing. Returned next day, changed." Was I losing my mind, or being hunted by the sea itself? On our 8th night, the sonar pings grew so loud that I couldn't sleep. I abandoned my bunk, wrapped myself in a parka, and climbed out onto the upper deck. The fog was denser than ever, so thick that breathing felt like drinking cold milk. The ship's trail behind us faded, absorbed into the nothingness. Resting my elbows on the rail, I stared into the white void, forcing myself to listen without letting fear throttle me. Hours stretched and folded into one another. The ping slowed, became deeper, as if whatever it was below had grown tired or bored. But then the ship jolted, a sudden motion so severe I clung to the rail. The engine alarms shrieked, only to fall silent seconds later. Shadows flickered beneath the waves, darker than any whale or machinery I had ever seen. For a split second, the fog seemed to pull away around the ship, as if a circle had been cut into the world. Beneath us, I saw movement in the water. A massive form twisting, faceless yet ancient, trailing a wake that never broke the surface. My mind rebelled at the scale. It was not natural. The air tasted metallic, electric. A question for those listening. If you saw something the world could never explain, would you let curiosity drive you closer? Or would you run for the safety of ignorance? Let me know, because some questions are safer left unanswered, while the rest of the ship's passengers remained asleep and unaware. The shadow beneath us drifted away with the dawn, leaving only silence and a normalized radar. I half expected to wake in my bunk and find it all had been a nightmare. But the saltwater stains on my clothes and the persistent static on my data confirmed it was all too real. On our final approach back to port, the fog thinned, sunlight breaking through for the first time in 9 days. The team was eager to disembark, imagined promotions and papers glimmering in their minds. But my only goal was to set foot on solid ground and promise myself I'd never again seek what shouldn't be found. Now, every night as I try to sleep, I hear phantom pings, echoes of a presence that moved in perfect silence beneath our hull. The data from that voyage remains corrupted, my memory unfinished. The ocean is not just water and life and movement. It is memory itself. The final archive for all things lost, counted and cataloged in ways we may never translate. If these words reach you, if you ever take a ship into the North Atlantic, and the fog grows too thick or the night stretches too long, listen closely for the sound of unnatural echoes. Stay by the light. Try not to listen too hard to what hums under the waves. Sometimes, the ocean looks back. And if you ever disappear for 14 hours and return with a piece of yourself missing, remember, you're not the first and you won't be the last. The sea is patient. It will wait for you again. Do you ever double-check your hotel room number? That small comfort that assures you you're exactly where you should be? Sometimes, a simple mistake leads you places that aren't even supposed to exist. That's how my nightmare began. On a Mediterranean luxury cruise, in a room no one else could enter, no matter how many times I tried to call for help. I'm a travel blogger, 26, always chasing new destinations for my subscribers and sponsors. This cruise was supposed to be easy content, full of sun, laughter, and beautiful decks. I'd booked cabin 910, but at check-in, they handed me a key marked 912. "Enjoy your stay," the clerk said, barely glancing up as she passed the card. I shrugged it off, slipping into the crowd that poured on board, everyone excited for the journey ahead. The corridor to 92 was oddly quiet, tucked beyond the last staircase. The door opened smoothly. The air inside was cooler than the rest of the ship. A welcome relief from the heat outside. My eyes scanned the room, which was larger, cleaner, and newer than any I'd booked before. I dropped my bag, made a quick video for my socials, and started unpacking. That's when I realized my room didn't match my booking details at all. The app and desk directory only listed cabin 910, never 92. Later that evening, the corridor outside was busy with staff carts and small talk. I recorded a room tour, panned across the window, and paused. That's when I first heard it, knocking from inside the wall, slow, steady, and unmistakably deliberate. The sound wasn't random, but a repetition, as if asking for attention. I pressed my ear closer to the plaster, listening. After a moment, the sound faded, replaced by a faint scratching. I filmed it, my voice shaking as I commented on the odd noises for my viewers. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Again, the knocks behind the headboard, this time faster, growing to a feverish rhythm. In the bleariness of midnight, I spoke into my phone saying, "Strange sounds, cabin 912. When I played the clip back later, my words were slower, distorted, and barely recognizable. By morning, sunlight poured across the bed, but the sense of wrongness lingered like a heavy fog. Someone had opened my suitcase, arranged my clothes, and taken my journal from beneath a pile of scarves. I found the journal open on the desk, pages torn and ink smeared. At breakfast, I approached the night manager, explaining everything, the knocking, the confusion with the room assignment, the missing items. He checked the system and then shook his head. "You're listed for cabin 910, not 92. There is no 92 on this deck." When I returned to my room, the key card still worked on the door marked 92. Throughout the day, no one else in the corridor paid attention to my door. Service staff stopped short of my threshold, eyes flicking away, wheels turning on the carts, but never pausing at my doorway. That evening, the sounds began again. Urgent, knocking, then insistent scratching like someone desperate to get out or in. My phone buzzed with a glitchy notification. "No room found." I tried to reach guest services. "Miss, are you sure about your cabin number?" The voice on the other line echoed. "We only show 910 in our system." My frustration mounted as I returned to the unrecognized door, still opening with my card, never failing. During the second night, I set my camera to record. At 2:17 a.m., a voice, impossibly muffled yet clear enough, whispered my name. The room temperature dropped, my breath briefly visible in the camera's lens. The voice faded into rapid tapping, as if telling me to hurry, telling me to escape. I watched in terrified awe as the camera turned itself, focusing not on my face, but on the empty spot beside the closet. The mirror by my bed began to rattle softly. I pressed my palm to the glass, my reflection twisted, blurred, and for a wild second revealed hollow eyes. My own, blank but alive with fear. On impulse, I checked the bathroom cabinet. Behind the towels, I found a slip of paper. "Check behind mirror." When I looked, I caught the shadow of another person, just for a moment, before it melted away. On the third morning, exhaustion took over. My posts, scheduled through my content app, disappeared from my feed, replaced by error codes in Spanish and Greek. My social media bio was gone. I stared at the blinking screen, unable to log in, feeling as if someone had cut the wire connecting me to reality. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and sent a frantic text to my best friend. "Something's wrong. Cabin not listed, staff says it doesn't exist. Help." Minutes later, location not found. The GPS said I was somewhere off the coast, in open water, though my ship was docked. My camera recorded more that night, knocking, scratching, and a rising sense of panic. I called the crew, but nobody came. The light flickered overhead, then failed. The emergency lights glowed red, casting the walls in eerie shadows. Footsteps thudded down the corridor, but whenever I looked, the hallway was empty and endless. Feeling trapped, I tried to break through the confusion. I checked every inch of the room, behind wall panels, under the bed, inside the closet. At dawn, I found another slip of paper tucked behind the safe. "Don't trust the mirror." I covered it with a towel, but the tapping behind the wall continued undisturbed. As the days passed, my sense of time dissolved. Sometimes my phone showed the correct date, sometimes it jumped hours ahead or behind. My things kept moving without explanation. My suitcase appeared on the balcony, zipped and locked, even after I'd left it under the desk. One evening, I found my shoes standing perfectly aligned by the door, though I hadn't touched them in days. I tried switching rooms. The manager guided me to cabin 910. The key card scanned, but inside, the room was empty. Completely vacant, no furniture, no art, not even sheets on the bed. Yes, the number on the door matched my booking. But all my belongings were back in 912, so I returned, the card opening the door again without resistance. The fourth night, the knocking grew louder. I banged back in frustration, shouting through the wall. Something or someone knocked in answer, not in anger, but in pleading, each knock slower than the last. At a breaking point, I screamed for help, hoping someone might hear. No answer, except the echo that seemed to come from inside myself. That night, I sat on the floor behind the locked door, recording audio of the relentless taps and scratching. My mind raced wildly. Was I alone in the room? Or had the room itself become alive, hungry for acknowledgement? I whispered my name into the darkness, asking if anyone was there. My own voice played back through the phone, slowed and stretched, warped out of recognition. The next morning, everything changed. My key card no longer worked on cabin 912. Only the cleaning staff's pass opened the door, and they refused to help, eyes drawn tight, lips pressed tight against the questions my stare asked. My suitcase and camera stayed locked inside, every memory of my days vanishing, every record erased. With one last burst of hope, I ran to the purser's desk. "Have you heard any sounds, any complaints from cabin 912? The attendant typed furiously, brow furrowed, then looked at me with disbelief. "That room isn't listed anywhere on the ship. Maybe try checking another floor?" I tried, but never found another 912. Feeling invisible, I wandered the crowded decks all day, the sun beating down and laughter everywhere. Each attempt to share my experience through Twitter, WhatsApp, even handwritten notes, ended in confusion or denial. My feed stopped responding. My blog was wiped clean. My own identity seemed to be dissolving with each hour spent near that door. The last night arrived. I packed every bag in a daze, determined to stay awake, camera by my side for evidence. Just after midnight, the knocking returned, the wall vibrating with every tap. The air grew thick and sweet, almost suffocating. I felt outside myself, untethered, as if the room had finally claimed me. Somewhere outside time, between dreams and waking, the mirror seemed to breathe. The walls moved closer, and the knocking came from inside myself. My eyes blurred, and the sounds melted into a continuous hum, like the heart of a ship forgotten by everyone. But they vanished. When the alarm sounded outside, I opened my door, found the hallway empty except for the distant ringing that faded as I moved further away. Morning light spilled into cabin 9-2, unnaturally bright, illuminating every surface. My camera, left running, recorded only silence, hours of empty room and unbroken tension. I checked out, the staff wishing me well, card returned, and a polite nod shared. As I walked off the ship, the deck manager asked, "How was your stay? In cabin 910? For a moment I thought to correct him, but I said nothing. Days later, the cruise company confirmed my reservation for cabin 910, billing for a room I never truly entered. My live streams for that week never posted. My suitcase, when delivered, was packed with someone else's belongings, oddly familiar, but not mine. Sometimes I still hear the scratching wall, the urgent voice calling my name, even when I'm far away from the sea, in places no map can mark. My reflection, when it catches me at night, flickers just for an instant, eyes hollow, just waiting for a door with no record, on a ship with a cabin meant for people who never leave. If you ever find yourself holding the key to a room not listed anywhere, listen. There are places on every journey that want to be found. If you find one, remember, some rooms are waiting, not for visitors, but for someone to disappear. My name is Omar, and for 10 years of my life, I have called the galley of a cruise ship my second home. If you have never worked on one, you can't know the relentless rhythm. Knives flashing under neon lights, the hiss of steam, feet slapping on tile, menus changing mid-shift, orders streaming in through headsets, and always the pulse of the ocean beneath your feet, steady but unpredictable. During hurricane season, the Caribbean can go from postcard paradise to a nightmare in hours. This is the story of one storm that locked me inside the walk-in freezer, and what I heard and lived before anyone above deck had even smelled rain. For days leading up to it, everyone aboard whispered about the storm building in the southeast. I watched the sky change shade by shade, blue turning slate, the sun made weak by moving bands of clouds. The galley had the nervous energy of a beehive before thunder, pots rattling, voices low. I was prepping seafood chowder, reviewing stock, and double-checking our emergency meal plans for when the waves would get too rough to plate salmon fillets with precision. I've survived too many sudden gales not to think ahead. We set up backup stoves and made extra stock. The captain's report was cautious optimism, route slightly changed, weather likely rough but passable. The front office never lets you see fear. Everything was normal by ship standards up until sunset as squalls came in, turning the horizon nearly black. The windows heaved with sudden blasts of wind, and diners grumbled as chairs shifted and cutlery slid in their hands. Most guests disappeared to their rooms. The upper kitchen staff briefed us for a late service, expecting sick passengers and fewer crowds. But orders didn't stop. I was in and out of cold storage all night, rolling carts and bins, checking labels and stacking crates of fish and greens. There's a kind of isolation that hits in the galley. Behind thick, metal-chilled doors, the world narrowed to whatever you can see in the narrow spill of fluorescent light. Sometime near midnight, the ship took a long, slow lean to starboard. Glasses toppled, and in a flash of panic, everyone braced for impact that never came. Kitchen talk turned dark, jokes about The big one. I called to one of the assistants to double-check the freezer seals. Can't have soup thawing or ice cream melting. He nodded, and I ducked inside for just a minute, hearing nothing but the usual hum. The click of the latch on the big door closing wasn't new. It never worried me before. But that night, the lock jammed mid-close, and I spun around to find myself really trapped, alone with frozen salmon, tubs of stock, and stacks of bins waiting for daylight. First, I thought it was a prank. Sous chefs endure a lot. But there was nothing playful in the way the noise of the outer galley faded to absolute nothing. The overhead light flickered. One bulb went out. The chill pressed through my bones. I hit the intercom switch and cursed softly when it hissed static. I banged on the door, called out for help. No response, only the groan and snap of the moving ship. I checked my watch. You lose track of seconds in these sealed boxes, but I know it was too long. The low hum of the engine slowed, faltered, then came the voice. At first, muffled as if piped in through a vent or speaker. Male, steady, cold. Prepare to abandon ship, repeat. All hands to lifeboats. It made no sense. The only alarms were my own heartbeat. I froze. Another voice echoed after. Calm, measured, almost lazy in its certainty. Evacuate immediately. Secure all access points. This is not a drill. The air felt thinner than air, like I was listening underwater or dreaming. I slammed the door again, calling for anyone, then fell silent, listening hard. I knew every sound the chillers made, every clank and rattle from the compressors above. But these voices were wrong. Off frequency, unhurried, not broadcast on any staff channel. The lights dimmed again. Condensation beaded on the steel. Then another sound. Footsteps, soft but regular, moving outside as if someone walked the hall. I shouted again. The footsteps paused, then resumed, passing away. I was sweating inside my chef's jacket despite the bitter cold. Maybe 5 minutes passed, or much more. My phone showed nothing, no service, no clock update, the screen flickering. I tried to pace, rubbing my arms, thinking through emergency procedures. When I stopped moving, that's when I heard the conversation. Two people, one instructing the other. Seal the doors. T-minus 10 minutes. Prepare lifeboat starboard and port side. Secure the passengers. It was the language you'd hear only in drills. Textbook perfect. Nothing like the chaos that would come in a real disaster. But the ship was barely rocking, making only normal storm groans. An eternity passed. I pressed both palms to the door, desperate to be heard, and the cold seemed to radiate up my arms. Somewhere beyond the steel, the voices kept going, almost conversational. Then, unmistakably, I heard my own name. Clear as a bell. Omar. Maybe it's madness in the cold, lack of sleep, but it was enough to make me lunge at the door handle again. This time it rattled but didn't budge. My breathing steamed the air so much I could barely make out the control panel's glow. Suddenly, I heard shouts. Real ones this time. Crew yelling, the distant clang of metal, a burst of static over the ship PA. All crew, update, remain at stations. Then, dead silence. My breath froze in my throat. The freezer felt smaller by the second. The chill felt alive. I remembered an old story about a galley cook locked in by jealous rivals, forgotten in a blackout, found after the voyage with fingernails clawed down to bone. I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the implication. Why hadn't the alarm sounded throughout the ship? Why had no one radioed a check on missing personnel? My mind raced through faces and voices from years at sea. I banged again on the door, shouted until my voice cracked. Then came another calm order, almost whispered this time, so close I thought someone stood beside me. Abandon ship. Do not delay. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The ship kept swaying, subtle but steady. The cold crept up my legs. I don't know how many hours passed in that repeating cycle of panic, desperate hope, and something like sleep standing up. I tried to count the time by the hum of the generator, the rhythmic beta of the compressor, but everything was off. Time warped. It felt like I was there for an entire night, but the freezer clock, when I checked, showed only 90 minutes. When the latch finally budged, it was from the outside. The assistant cook's freckled face appeared, shocked, asking how I'd even managed to get locked in. "No alarms went off," he said. "No order to abandon ship." The kitchen was alive, noisy, routine. I staggered out, shivering, and checked every log, every staff report. No one claimed to have heard any evacuation order. Management shrugged, then scolded me for nodding off on duty. The captain assured me no drill was run, no security breach. I checked the bridge logs myself. No disturbance, no unusual radio signals. Just a regular storm report and a minor alarm about loose supplies. My assistant recounted how he'd overheard a chef say, "He's taking too long in the walk-in." So he came up and opened it with his pass. His voice was tight, like he couldn't quite believe it himself. The rest of the voyage, I kept to routine. But I listened, a different way. I surveyed faces, waited for crew jokes about weird voices, but nothing ever came. Still, in the quiet moments, when the rest of the crew was asleep and I was scraping fryer baskets in the dead chill, I'd catch those tones behind the walls. The urge to flee rose strong and sudden, seeing glimpses of shadows in stainless steel surfaces, hearing the subtle shift of footsteps that paused by the door. I started carrying a flashlight in my pocket, just in case. Something I'd mocked green crew for in my first season. Late in the run, during another minor gale, the freezer door didn't close all the way one night. Flickering lights spilled in from the kitchen, and for a split second, I saw the shadow of a man move between the racks. Footsteps just out of sight. No one reported anything missing or odd. But that night, I saw on the CCTV playback a silhouette pausing in front of the galley entry for 3 minutes, vanishing as the lights blinked. That was the end of the season for me. I finished my contract, packed my kit, and when the purser asked if I'd stay for another tour, I shook my head. That ship was still on its roots, still serving churros and lobster to smiling passengers. But inside, behind the cold metal and routine, something waited. I never again allowed myself to be the last one into cold storage, and I never volunteered overtime on hurricane nights. Years later, I talked to other chefs about life at sea, and occasionally one lowers their voice and admits, sometimes, on the worst nights, the ship talks back to you. Some think it's the wind, some call it madness. I know it's more. A pattern in the chaos, signals in the static, warnings from some place or time outside the schedules and checklists. Nothing official, nothing you could trace or record. Just order in the calm and the cold. Repeated when you're the only one there to hear. I still keep my chef's knife sharp and my flashlight close, even though I work now only on land. Sometimes, late at night, as storms roll in past my quiet kitchen window, I hear, faint as memory, "Prepare to abandon ship." And I shiver. Not from cold, but from what I know is still drifting just beneath the waves, waiting for another lonely soul locked behind a cold steel door. My name is Ray, and for decades, my life was defined by the sea. Service as a Coast Guard officer taught me every lesson the Pacific could offer. except for the one I learned too late: what it means to question time itself. When I retired, I thought the ocean's mysteries would leave me alone. But the truth is, out here, nothing stays buried. The lost always find their way back, one way or another. What happened to me that quiet autumn on a repositioning cruise cannot be found in any Coast Guard report. But it's as real as the rust that creeps along the railings and the echo of boots on empty decks. A cruise isn't so different from a cutter or a freighter. Order, routine, the constant hum of engines. The difference is the passengers, floating across time zones, chasing sunsets. I'd book the voyage to clear my head, wake up slow, and count the horizon lines until I ran out of memories. The Pacific was calm as glass. Each morning, the sun crept over the water, filling outdoor decks with pink gold, making the complicated world seem simple. Early on, my days became a ritual. Breakfast alone, coffee at the stern. The crew was polite, if distant. Most were young, working contracts until the next bigger wage. I kept mostly to myself, reading, writing notes, and watching the endless water roll by. My uniform days were behind me, but old habits die painfully slow. One morning, just before dawn, I noticed something wrong. The air was chill for autumn, a kind of sharpness uncommon this far south. I was drawn to the port side because of a darker shape far off in the blue-gray mist. A lifeboat riding low, barely visible, but undeniably there. All those years of search and rescue, instinct spoke before logic. That shape was trouble. I flagged down a deckhand, my voice clipped with urgency that didn't match my age or status. "There's someone out there," I said, gesturing toward the distant lifeboat. The guy squinted, shrugged, told me I must have seen a whale or driftwood. But my eyes were trained for difference, for the outline that means life or death. I insisted, asking for binoculars. Here's something only those who know the sea can grasp. Sometimes what's lost isn't truly gone. Sometimes it floats. Sometimes it waits. Have you ever stared so hard at the water that you're certain something is looking back, deciding whether to let you go? I watched the shape for half an hour, adrenaline prickling my skin, recalling every distress call I'd ever taken. The binoculars showed nothing more. Hazy outline, sunken bulk. I took a photograph, sure I'd need evidence for the captain. When I arrived at the bridge with the story, the crew gave polite smiles, humor for the restless retiree. The captain listened, even steered a few degrees port, checked the radar. Nothing. "No echoes," he said. "Open water." That day, the sense of unease blossomed inside me. I double-checked my wristwatch, a relic from years of service, always set to UTC. The face was misted over, trouble with condensation, 6 hours advanced. Impossible. I returned to my cabin, checked my schedule, but nothing matched. My day felt stolen. I spent the afternoon tracking the lifeboat's path, overlaying it on old rescue maps I'd kept out of habit. There was no logical way for a lifeboat to be drifting alone here, not unless something catastrophic had happened, and no such report was on the ship's log or the news. Darkness gathered quickly that evening. I tried to relax in my stateroom, leafing through old logbooks and sipping scalding tea. The wind picked up, the ship groaned, and then, so sudden I nearly spilled my cup, a series of urgent knocks resounded through the corridor. Not knocks against a door, but hollow, as though inside the walls. If you lost hours of your life to the sea and saw your own rescue, would you believe in logic? Or dread the possibility that something wanted to call you back? The next dawn, Shaken but determined, I visited the purser's office and asked for a printout of passenger lists. The attendant, a brisk woman with clipped words, hesitated, claiming privacy protocol. But something in my eyes convinced her. She handed me a short stack of sheets, the manifest, with clearly printed names, cabin assignments, and mine. Next to it, a small note. Deceased, Pacific Star incident. My breath caught. The file, stamped and dated years ago, named me as lost at sea from another ship, one I vaguely remembered investigating as a junior officer decades before, but never being involved personally. Confused, I demanded the file's origin. The purser apologized, blaming a clerical error or database corruption. But the script, the wording, and the date, none of it made sense. I pulled out my phone, texted my son at home, but each message bounced back, user not found. My email, likewise, failed to reach any destination. Days passed, and the mystery deepened. The lifeboat appeared again, every morning at dawn, always further away, always exactly where it shouldn't logically be. No radar, no acknowledgement by crew. I walked the lower decks in darkness, drawn toward the sea, certain that if I tried hard enough, I could catch the boat's markings or spot a hand waving for help. But every effort betrayed me. Memories grew weaker. My watch kept jumping forward. 6 hours, sometimes more. Time aboard seemed broken. Crew members began avoiding me, politely but intentionally. The captain stopped meeting my eyes. Passengers who had shared dinner a few nights earlier failed to recall my name. When I ordered coffee, the server served me, but my order didn't register at the counter. How do you prove to others that you exist when every sign begins to vanish? The record, the clock, even the memories in other people's minds. One night, after another failed attempt to catch the lifeboat on camera, I wandered the empty promenade deck. There, in the pale half-light, I heard a faint voice calling, not loud, not desperate, but quiet and insistent. It spoke my name, the same way the rescue dispatcher used to say it over the radio when everything was on the line. "Ray, do you copy?" Chills ran through me. I answered, but the only reply was the creak of the ship and a low rumble from the engines. The voice faded, but did not leave my thoughts. By now, the crew was treating me as an apparition, the ship as a liminal space I wandered without anchor. I found myself in the library, searching for records of disappearances, accidental deaths, shipwrecks near our route. Nothing matched my credentials or location. Even the Coast Guard's database, when accessed from the ship's Wi-Fi, redirected to a blank page. The next morning, the lifeboat was back, visible from the port deck, pale in the blue gloom. I pressed against the glass, desperate. The form inside, shadowed, hunched, raised a hand. For a split instant, I saw my own face reflected in the water, wearing the old Coast Guard uniform, pale and unreadable. I reeled, mind scrambling for sense. Desperately, I ran to the crew, begging them to launch a rescue. The first mate responded with professional concern. "Sir, please return to your cabin." But he couldn't disguise the flicker of dread in his eyes. I threatened to trigger the alarm myself, but the system failed to register my security code. In frustration, I went outside, into the thin wind, and watched as the lifeboat faded into mist once again. Hours later, trying to calm myself, I checked my cabin clock, now 12 hours fast. My own watch spun in delirious advance, the tick of seconds stretching almost audibly in the silence. I scrawled notes in my logbook, but the words vanished the next day. The ship moved on. I watched the lifeboat's game each morning and night, losing track of how many days passed. I became convinced I'd left some crucial duty unfinished, that my name's listing as deceased was a warning, not a mistake. I remembered stories of sea ghosts, unrescued survivors haunting ships, never truly crossing over. If you saw a lifeboat on the empty sea bearing your own reflection, how long before you question which side of the water you truly occupy? My final morning at sea, the ship turned toward a port city, land visible for the first time in ages. I thought maybe grounding would break the curse, shake off the lingering fog of half-existence. But as the passengers disembarked, staff failed to check my ID. The exit scanner blinked, but my presence wasn't logged. Logged out, overlooked, I drifted to shore as if carried by someone else's story. My phone, working for the first time in days, buzzed with a news alert. Retired Coast Guard officer found dead after cruise ship incident. The picture was old, but it was me, no question. I went home, but nothing settled. Calls to family drifted unanswered. Neighbors failed to register my greetings. I wandered the docks, watching lifeboats bob in every harbor, knowing that I would never truly belong on shore again. That night, alone in my small apartment, I opened my old Coast Guard journal, blank except for one line. 6 hours missing. Case never closed. Years later, the dream returns. A lifeboat drifting in silent fog, my own voice calling for help, the feeling of existing just beside the world, almost present, almost lost. Time on the ship moved forward, and I moved back, forever between dawn and dusk. If anyone hears this, remember, the sea knows it's lost, and one day, all it's lost come back in lifeboats, waiting for the living to notice, wave back, and mark their name among the missing. Within the mist, on open water, the clock ticks both ways, and the records never truly close. My name is Sean, and before last summer, I thought I understood the boundaries between adventure and nightmare. I was 20, a college student on my first Alaska cruise, joined by my roommates Eli and Marcus, and a pack of other friends whose names blurred together as easily as the days and nights on the sea. We were all there for the scenery, the big ship, the casino, and karaoke. And for me, a first taste of freedom from a life that, until that trip, never truly felt like my own. The first afternoon, we rushed to the upper decks, jackets zipped against the damp. The sun hung low, already streaking the horizon pink, and every surface, from the glass windbreaks to the lacquered wood rails, sparkled with condensation. The air buzzed with announcements, restaurants, ice carving demos, trivia nights, and with the nervous laughter of everyone waiting for the first muster drill, the one cruise ritual you can't ignore or skip. The announcement hit with a shrill 7-blast alarm, sharp enough to rattle every rib. This is your mandatory safety drill. Please bring your ship card and proceed to your assigned muster station. We hustled down corridors, following crew in orange jackets, joking about lifeboat races and icebergs, as if none of us were really worried. I showed my card, had it scanned, and stood shoulder to shoulder with passengers, life jackets strapped, while a crew member ran through procedure. What to do if the ship listed, where to find vests, how to wait quietly for instructions. The drill ended, and the crowd broke into easy laughter. But as we left, a different crew member, pale, silent, not familiar, tapped my arm and signaled me down an adjoining hallway, his hand firm and cold on my shoulder. "You've been selected for supplemental muster, Station C deck," he said. "Please follow me." At first, I waved to my friends, shouting a joke, expecting them to follow. No one did. I turned to question the crewman, but he was already a few steps ahead, gliding through a maze of unfamiliar corridors. The hallway lights flickered, humming an uneasy tune. My legs failed to find their usual stride. It felt as if the air grew thick and heavy. Doors on either side displayed no numbers I recognized. There was no signage, only cold steel dotted with condensation as we descended. I fought back the urge to turn and bolt, but politeness and unease meshed together. Crew uniforms passed in my periphery, blank faces, no emotion, eyes focused only on the walls ahead. Quiet muster in progress, someone whispered, but their lips barely moved. We rounded a final corner and emerged onto a deck I'd never seen. No guests, just lines of crew in perfect rows, as if choreographed for a silent dance conducted by an unseen hand. I hesitated. Someone handed me a different life jacket. This one felt heavier, awkward, with faded writing inside I couldn't decipher. The drill began again, not spoken but mimed. Hands pointing, helmets donned, ropes tested. But none of the actions matched the earlier muster. No one looked at me. No one spoke. When I tried to catch a crew member's eyes, I saw nothing but the shimmer of water reflected in their gaze. The entire scene played out in a hush, broken only by the distant groan of engines. My breath left vapor trails in the air, which felt oddly colder than the upper decks. I raised a hand to ask a question, the way we're told to in drills, but my arm was ignored. Behind us, doors slowly began to swing shut, metal on metal with a sound like the last call at a funeral. A single alarm sounded again, one long note, lower than before. In sync, every crew member turned left, faced the sea, and held their position. I was motioned forward, footsteps echoing on the deck. Far below, the water was black, filled with drifting ice. Somewhere out among the floes, a lone seagull wheeled in circles, crying for no one. The temperature continued to drop. My lips numbed, my hands shook. Crew filed past me, still silent, their steps inhumanly deliberate. The door I came through closed with a slam that bounced between my ribs. I reached out, caught nothing. I remember my heart thumping as my toes caught on a grating. Everything was damp, every breath stung with brine and chill. Suddenly, I was alone on that hidden deck. The muster was over. The crew, with all their silence and ritual, had vanished. I leaned against the steel wall and tried to steady my breathing. Above, lights flickered once. Then everything snapped, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I was convinced I'd fallen asleep, and that this was the kind of nightmare you only have at sea. Long passageways, cold wind, the sense of being always watched by something old and tidal. But the cold wrapping me was real. I still shivered uncontrollably. One drip, then another. Water pooled at my shoes. I brushed my hair back and my hand came away wet. Salt water, not sweat. Time lost meaning. I wandered the corridor, my footfalls echoing unnaturally. Around each bend, I expected myself to rejoin the familiar crowds. Instead, I found more silence. Doors locked, windows fogged. Only the distant vibrations of machinery hinting at life. My reflection in a porthole showed eyes ringed with confusion, cheeks scratched by something unremembered. After what felt like hours, I stepped through a doorway and found myself back in my stateroom. I gasped for air, collapsed onto the bed, and realized it was soaked with seawater. Sheets twisted into sodden spirals. I peeled off layers of cold, heavy clothing. It was as if I'd been held underwater, struggling and surfacing only moments before drowning. My friends burst in. "Sean, we thought you were napping for hours," one joked, tossing chips at my chest. I couldn't explain. Words would not come. Just a feeling of cold confusion and shame for not joining them. They remembered nothing odd. To them, the drill had ended, and we'd all returned as a group. How? Was I wet? No one saw me leave. I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from my mom, which I didn't recall. My messages listed as sent 6 hours ago at a time when, in my memory, I'd still been trapped outside of daylight. Later that night, lying awake, I heard the ship's horn sound once, then silence, then, soft and far below, a string of crew voices quietly counting off muster positions. It faded before I could be sure. The feeling of being called, sorted, then dismissed never left. Over the next days, I watched the ship for clues. Crew avoided my gaze. On the lower decks, doors stuck for me alone. When I passed cleaning staff, whispers followed. A young chef looked at my wrist and became pale. I caught sight of myself in mirrors, always a second behind, as if my reflection were following a different version of me up the stairs. At dinner, Marcus asked about my arm, where red welts crusted the skin. Just a rash, I lied. Each night, the same sequence, drifting off, being shaken awake by a distant horn and feeling my mouth flood with ocean salt. Old women on the promenade said I looked thin as sea glass. I spent hours scanning the maps for sea deck, never listed. No mention of my secret muster station, not on any directory, not on announcements, not in the official app. I asked the front desk, and the attendant blinked. No such place, Sean. Maybe you misunderstood your assignment? All I could do was nod and back away. The cruise carried on. Towns slipped past like faded watercolor paintings outside the windows, each one a brief pulse of life before retreating back to endless ocean. I walked the corridors often alone now. Senses sharpened, but always searching for that hidden deck, the silent crew, the drill that no one acknowledged. Passengers chatted and laughed, unaware of the strange undertow pulling at the edges of my mind. Nights were the worst. The twilight stretched long, turning the sky into a deep bruise between light and dark. On these evenings, I could almost hear the whispered counts again, like voices on static, relentless and calling me back to the drill I never finished. I would close my eyes beneath the thin blankets of my cabin bed, clutching the saltwater-soaked sheets, and wonder who else was there. Who else had been pulled aside and lost in the depths of the ship's shadow? The crew avoided me discreetly, shifting conversations away just as I neared. My friends grew distant, their smiles tighter and words fewer. I overheard fragments, mentions of a lost passenger, a ghost sighting, or a man who disappears during drills. The ship's staff looked out for me, but never spoke openly, their faces taut with unspoken fear or denial. I started keeping a small journal, scribbling every detail, every glimpse of that second muster, every time the lights flickered or the corridor hummed with unseen life. I mapped every step leading to that hidden floor, though none of the ship's blueprints matched what I experienced. The hidden deck was a liminal space, a place existing between safety and danger, order and chaos. Then one evening near the end of the cruise, I found a crew laundry room door left ajar, an invitation or a trap. Inside, the worn floors gleamed under flickering fluorescent lights. Crates stacked in neat rows, but filled with nothing but silence. At the far end, a narrow stairwell led upward, and drawn by a force I could not resist, I climbed. The stairwell opened onto the secret muster deck, bathed in harsh white light. Crew gathered like statues once again, their faces masks of calm. I tried to call out. This time, my voice found purchase, breaking the silence just long enough for a few heads to turn toward me with eyes glowing unnaturally. My pulse raced. The drill had begun anew. That night, I never returned to my cabin. Instead, I followed the crew's silent orders. learned their wordless signals, counted the seconds between warnings and evacuations. The endless sea whispered outside. Somewhere on that endless twilight path, the call was waiting for the lost, the forgotten, and the ones like me who'd slipped between the lines. Now, I write this knowing the truth. The ship holds more than tourists and travelers. It keeps secrets, locked in those quiet musters without passengers, where the living and the lost dance in the shadow of the ocean's infinite blue. If you ever sail in twilight, watch the muster stations carefully. Some drills never end, and some crews are waiting, counting for another to join them silently beside the uncounted waves. My name is Tyler, and for 3 years I have worked as the night shift photographer aboard cruise ships sailing the Hawaiian Islands route. My job feels like guarding memories, frozen moments amid the ocean's eternal dance, capturing laughter in deckside bars, the delicate arc of a tossed cocktail, sunsets melting into waves, and nighttime skies sparkling with distant stars. The ocean is a tranquil companion for most. But one calm evening last summer, beneath a sky so still it seemed to hold its breath, I found myself staring into a cosmic silence that no lens could capture. A vanishing trace of our very passage. The night began ordinary enough. The Pacific lay smooth and glassy, reflecting the silver crescent of the moon and the serene eyes of the stars. The gentle hum of the ship's engines was my soundtrack as I reviewed drone footage from earlier that day, watching the ship from above as the brilliant white hull cut through the azure sea. But something in the video stopped me cold. The ship's wake, that restless, churning trail of white foam, disintegrated almost instantly, swallowed by the dark water. It was as if the sea itself was erasing the proof of the journey, erasing the presence of the ship as if it had never passed. Curious and increasingly unnerved, I headed to the mid-deck to recalibrate the drone's main camera, an essential routine to maintain the perfect shots guests expect. The corridors were quiet, lit by soft emergency lighting, the ship mostly asleep. As I walked, I noticed the security cameras flickering erratically. One after another, they blinked off, plunging into darkness exactly 12 seconds each, leaving shadows in the hallways. Blank, unrecorded moments slipping through time like water. The temperature seemed to drop. My breath became visible, a white mist unraveling into the night air. The rhythm of the engines faltered, stuttering, like a heart skipping beats. Time distorted, minutes stalled, seconds stretched into moments that felt both endless and vanished. Reality folded in on itself, and I found myself immersed in a silent ocean of stillness that was neither here nor there. I blinked, and the cameras switched back on. Yet I was gone, disappeared from view, detached from the ship's digital eye. The water beneath us whispered secrets as the wake remained absent, leaving empty space behind where history should have etched its mark. I was lost in this quiet rift between existence and the impossible, caught in a drift of cosmic unease no one else aboard seemed to notice. In the following hours, I roamed the ship's decks, unnoticed, as friends laughed and crews bustled, anchored in their familiar routines. Conversations passed without recognition, empty echoes through watery walls. I felt present and absent simultaneously, a ghost tethered to the ship's heart, yet unseen by its eyes and cameras, as if erased by the very sea that hid the wake. Does the ocean remember those it calls into its depths? Or does it simply forget, erasing all but whispers and ghost patterns on a vanishing wake? That night marked the beginning of my descent into shadows beneath placid seas, traveling paths where time disappears and the sea breathes cosmic secrets into the hearts of those lost beyond the horizon. Days slipped into a haze of unanswered questions and fading certainty. I found myself haunted by the void trailing the ship, the spot where wake should have rippled but did not. Documenting the phenomenon with my camera became not just a job, but an obsession. Each frame captured a growing emptiness, the water swallowing ripples, the horizon blurring, as if the Pacific intended to erase every trace of passage. I sought answers among the crew, but their eyes slid away when I mentioned the cameras dying for 12 seconds or the vanishing wake. They smiled politely and spoke of hardware faults or temporary glitches, words hollow as drifting mist. Security footage remained perplexingly intact, except for my own whereabouts during those lost seconds, a blank spot in the ship's ever-vigilant gaze. Compelled by a need I couldn't explain, I returned repeatedly to the mid-deck, the nexus of the unexplained, where reality shimmered uncertainly. There, beneath the million points of stars, the ocean seemed to breathe in slow, cosmic pulses, whispering secrets that sang beneath the waves and woven through the mist. I stood frozen in awe and dread, a lone figure absorbing the vastness that both beckoned and threatened. At night, I held my camera close, hoping the lens might unlock truths beyond human sight. Instead, I found odd distortions. Flickering shadows curled tightly in corners, shapes melding with the dark waters, moving with a liquid grace unlike any form I've ever photographed. The ship's aura shifted. Something old and formless brushed past unseen senses, as if the sea cradled a presence not bound by human logic. Those fleeting moments expanded into waves of foreboding as I pieced the puzzle together. A hidden realm where the ship's wake is no longer a linear truth, but a disappearing signature, a boundary between here and nowhere. Social interactions grew strained. Crew members who once greeted me with knowing nods now skirted around my questions. Passengers viewed me as a solitary figure, focused on a silent mission, a watcher recording fading ghosts of the wake. The routine of sharing stories over dinner or chatting in lounge rooms dissolved into silence or distracted mutterings whenever the topic, or my lingering gaze at the ocean's disappearing trace, came to the fore. An unsettling disconnect settled in. My own reflection began to show unfamiliar details. Shadows beneath eyes, a tightness around lips I did not recognize. Photos taken in the dim light of cabins showed less clarity than their subjects deserved. The edges of faces blurred or swallowed by shadow, as if dissolving into deeper darkness. One night, during a routine round, inspecting deck cameras, I stopped at the aft section where the swell broke softly against the ship's stern. I raised my eyes to the ocean and felt a presence, blank and unyielding. The disappearing wake whispered across open water, and from its depths, a pull, not of curiosity, but of warning. The sea holds its own history, written not in minerals or fossils, but in the dark, unread ripples that harbor forgotten things. I realized I was not just chronicling a tape erased by phenomenon, but standing on the brink of something vast and unknowable. Questions swirled with no answers. Was I witnessing a natural anomaly, a science yet to be understood? Or had the placid sea opened a door, one that leads beyond time, space, and human understanding? Was the disappearing wake a boundary, a veil lifting between what is seen and what should never be seen? Isolation deepened as I was pulled further into this cosmic mystery. Each attempt to reconnect with the crew and friends shrank, their eyes turning away, their voices hushed. I am becoming part of the wake, gone but here, erased but watching. At times I found brief comfort in logical explanations, stretched electromagnetic fields, natural plasma reflections. But certainty dissolved in the cold sea air. The ocean was alive, folding around the ship, warping the very essence of its path. Late in the voyage, the frequency of camera blackouts grew. The invisible line my ship tracked was shrinking, to a point where the wake's disappearance became total. I knew the risk, crossing a threshold where observation ends and oblivion begins. My reflection in glass warped, showing faces drawn with shadows I did not know. The photographs became a silent cry, a ghost story told in images, withheld from the world. Finally, one night as I stood recalibrating a camera mid-deck, the monitoring system froze. The ship's eyes blinked out for 12 seconds, and in that breath, the sea claimed me. There was no struggle, no pain, just a quiet slipping beyond the veil. My photographs remained as traces of a man who chased light, lost beneath a disappearing wake where time folded like water. When the last ripple disappears, what remains waits beneath the surface, in the vast, uncharted blue, where reality dissolves, and the sea keeps its forgotten tales. My name is Walter's widow, and this is my first solo vacation. A Baltic cruise cutting through bleak winter waters, cold mist curling over steel decks, and windows frosting over with each breath of icy wind. At 57, I carry the weight of years steeped in grief, a quiet sorrow that settles deep in my bones. This journey is meant to be a balm, a fragile hope that the sea might wash away the shadows that still cling to my heart. The ship feels vast and cold, a vessel moving through twilight silence, where frost paints delicate patterns on glass and the horizon blurs into mist. I walk the decks wrapped in layers of wool and memories, searching for something unnamed but deeply felt. The bitter wind bites at my cheeks, and each breath tastes of salt and forgotten stories. From the very first morning, something strange threads through the routine of my days. A crewman, young, quiet, with eyes that flicker like candlelight in the gray dawn, greets me by my late husband's name. His voice is soft, yet full of a familiarity that unsettles me with unexpected tenderness. "Good morning, my dear. Did you sleep well in our cabin on the last crossing?" he says, as if we shared a lifetime and a voyage only yesterday. His words hang heavy in the cold air, stirring echoes I thought long buried. How could this stranger speak of something that never was? A joint memory that lingers only in the spaces between grief and dreaming. Each day, his greeting is the same, constant, unyielding, a thread weaving me closer to a past that refuses to stay silent. I search for his face in the morning glow, hoping to anchor this strange familiarity in truth. But in the throng of uniformed faces, none claim the bond he voices. When I bring my unease to the purser, her eyes flicker with something close to dread, and she tells me there is no one by the name. He calls out, no record of passengers or crew matching the ghostly detail. Yet, beneath official dismissals, old sea tales whisper of crossings long past and names fading from lists, but never erased from the memory of the water and wood. A photograph emerges from the ship's archived manifest, a snapshot faded yellow and cracked, with a smiling younger version of myself among travelers from a crossing in 1979. The same voyage, the same ship, yet decades beyond what reason allows. What if the sea remembers those it loves, holding their stories beneath waves where time cannot follow? I am drawn back to the corridors where the crewman lingers, a shadow at the edge of sight, speaking in soft fragments about fog-shrouded mornings and shared confidences long vanished. His words are fragments of a puzzle with edges softened by salt and age. He speaks of a shared cabin, whispered dreams in the watchful gaze of the North Star, and laughter that echoes beneath the ship's timbers. As the cold voyage stretches on, the line between now and then begins to blur. The ship's rhythm slows to a breath between heartbeats. Passengers pass by like phantoms, unaware of the silent tale unfolding just beneath their feet. Light fractures through frost-laced windows, casting long, thin shadows where past and present conspire. The cold grips deeper, curling around my thoughts and seeped memories. I walk alone in the silent halls, the whisper of footsteps behind me breaking into nothingness when I turn. There is a cabin on this ship that holds more than forgotten luggage. It holds the thin, fragile veil between what was and what remains, between a life lived and love never lost. When those we loved refuse to leave, do they guide or haunt us? The days folded into one another, each dawn carrying the same chilling familiarity wrapped in the crewman's quiet greeting. Walter's name hovered in the cold air, both a balm and a blade, cutting through the fragile veil of this solitary voyage. I found myself chasing the edges of memory and reality, drawn to a haunting that lived somewhere between the frost-laced corridors and the sea's endless whisper. The ship's chill seemed to seep deeper into my bones, drawing out shadows long thought buried. I wandered the decks when the ship wasn't crowded, seeking solace beneath the skeletal trees of the Baltic coastline, glimpsed through frosted portholes. The world outside was a blurred painting of dark waters and muted skies, as though the sea and sky had merged in silent mourning. Within the ship's corridors, time was fractured. Moments slipped like shadows caught in candlelight. Faces appeared and vanished in the mist. Conversations echoed from rooms that no longer existed. I clutched my coat tighter, feeling the weight of absence pressing against me. The gap between now and then thinned with each passing hour. What if the past is not behind us, but beside us in every whispered greeting, in every borrowed voice? The crewman's presence remained constant, a spectral thread pulling me toward a cabin I never occupied yet knew too well. His eyes held a sadness without end, a shared history written in pauses and silences, a language only the broken know. He spoke of lazy mornings wrapped in warmth beneath a quilt sewn with laughter and whispered secrets. Nights when the storm thundered against the ship's sides, and the cabin was a sanctuary from the howling dark. The memories he painted were vivid brushstrokes on a canvas I long thought erased. Yet, there was no room for these dreams in the ship's manifest, no sign that they belonged to the present. I grappled with the unease settling in my belly. Was this specter an echo of the past, a dream born of grief, or a fragment of some reality tangled between worlds? When the present intertwines with echoes of what once was, how do we find the path back to ourselves? Each day, my isolation deepened. The crew and passengers moved in their own rhythms, unaware of the silent story unfolding amid the shadows. I spoke little, watching more, collecting fragments of the ship's secret pulse. The cold Baltic wind swept through the decks like a silent herald, carrying the scent of frozen dark and whispered tales etched into the very steel of the ship. Walter's name became a refrain, a melody threading through the monotony of the voyage, lifting me fleetingly from the chill of solitude. The crewman's words imbued the days with a strange reverence, a quiet reminder that some bonds endure beyond fading photos and forgotten logs. In the quietest moments, the past calls softly, if only we dare to answer. As the journey pressed on, the ship itself seemed to shift, its familiar contours flickering like a candle flame unsure in the wind. I sensed a gathering darkness, not just in the skies, but in the spaces between moments. an intangible presence weaving through the ship's corridors, touching memories and lives with invisible fingers. In the solitude of my cabin, I found myself drawn to the place that felt like the heart of this mystery. The cabin the crewman spoke of with such tenderness. I traced fingers over the frosted window, watching ice crystals bloom and fade, and wondered if that room was a portal, a threshold between what was, what is, and what might never be fully understood. What lodges in the spaces between memory and reality, waiting like a shadowed guest to be acknowledged. The Baltic winter deepened around us, wrapping the ship in a cloak of silence and snow. And with each passing day, I found myself less a passenger on this cold voyage and more a traveler between worlds, guided by a crewman who knew more than he revealed, and a past that refused to be left behind. The Baltic winter tightened its grip as we pressed on through waters that seemed to swallow more than just the ship's wake. The cold was a living thing, pressing through bones and memory alike, twisting around the hushed corridors like fingers reaching for forgotten corners. Walter's name hung like smoke, faint but persistent, a whisper that spun through the fabric of this ghostly voyage. The crewman's presence became more than a mere echo. He was the anchor to this unraveling story, the keeper of secrets written in frost and shadow. His soft voice betrayed a weighty history, a tether connecting me to a past stitched with love, loss, and mysteries hidden beneath layers of ice and time. As the ship sailed further into twilight, the lines between cannons and ghosts blurred. I saw faces from a time long past reflected in the glass, fleeting images that vanished before recognition could take form. The creak of the hull was no longer just the ship's song. It was a dirge for all the promises carried away by the sea's unyielding breath. Sometimes, the coldest nights warm the fiercest fires within, but those flames cast longer shadows. Each night I returned to the cabin I never occupied, but somehow knew. This delicate place between life's vivid moments and the fading whispers of memory. It held a quiet power, a breathless space where past and present entwined like the wake and water trailing behind the ship. The solitude was overwhelming. Around me, life continued in unaware cycles, laughter echoing across the dining halls, footsteps pacing endless hallways, the humming heart of engines that grumbled steady beneath the frozen deck. Yet I was caught between these rhythms and the haunting silence that stretched out in dim corners, where the room and reason faltered. What if the most haunting presence is not the one seen, but the one felt? An invisible companion, tracing the cold air with whispered remembrance? In the final hours before dawn, when the frozen sea was still and the horizon bled pale light, I stood alone on the deck. The dark water beneath seemed less a boundary and more a veil, thin and trembling. Walter's name was a quiet refrain, surfacing among the waves, a melody carried on the wind and remembered by the ship. The journey was never ordinary. It was a passage through grief, a crossing between worlds, and the cabin was a sanctuary where love and memory did not end but shifted, waiting beneath the surface where time can no longer reach. As the ship eased into harbor, the Baltic's icy breath melted into the warmth of the coming spring. The ghosts folded back into shadow, the ship sighed with release, and I found myself standing on solid ground, yet feeling adrift in a sea of new understanding. Walter's name had carried me through the cold and silence, guiding me where words and tears could not. The journey was a passage not just through water and ice, but through sorrow and remembrance, an eternal crossing where the crewman who knew me was more than a ghost. He was a keeper of stories, a guardian of the cabins we never truly left behind. Some stories sail beyond the ending, carried on waves that never break. My name is Liam, and I'm 31 years old, working as a contract IT technician aboard one of the largest transatlantic cruise ships cutting through the frigid North Atlantic this mid-February. The ocean stretches endlessly beneath gray skies, waves rolling in dark, restless patterns as the vessel pushes westward from Europe toward the distant shores of North America. My job is straightforward: maintain the ship's sprawling digital infrastructure, ensure communication systems function flawlessly, troubleshoot network issues, and keep thousands of passengers connected to the world beyond these cold waters. It's solitary work, spent mostly in server rooms and cable-filled corridors far below the polished decks where tourists sip cocktails and watch the horizon. During a routine maintenance sweep late one February night, something unusual breaks through the steady hum of the ship's internal radio communications. A persistent frequency buried deep within the spectrum broadcasts faint, fragmented conversations, voices discussing crew rotations, cabin assignments, and supply inventories that don't match any current manifests. At first, I assume it's interference from nearby vessels or a glitch in the aging analog systems still woven into the ship's modern network. But as I isolate the signal and filter out background noise, the voices become clearer, more urgent, speaking about events and people that simply don't exist in any official logs. The transmission repeats in loops, cycling through the same conversations every few hours. Crewmen discussing sealed cabins on decks that were renovated decades ago. A captain issuing orders for a storm that never appeared in weather records. Engineers reporting failures in equipment long since replaced. The voices are clear, distinct, and impossibly detailed. Yet, according to every database I access, these voyages never happened. Frequencies don't lie, but they can carry truths that the living were never meant to hear. Obsession takes root quickly. I spend my off hours tracing the signal's origin through the ship's labyrinthine communication network, following copper lines and fiber optic cables that snake through bulkheads and sealed passageways. The signal grows stronger as I descend into the lower decks, areas restricted to passengers and rarely visited even by crew. The air turns colder here, thick with the metallic scent of old machinery and decades of salt corrosion. Emergency lighting casts long shadows across rusted pipes and forgotten storage compartments. After 3 nights of obsessive tracking, I locate the source. A sealed hatch marked with faded warning signs and layers of paint, suggesting it hasn't been opened since the ship's first major refit in the early 90s. Using maintenance credentials and a pry bar, I force the hatch open, metal groaning in protest as decades-old seals crack and flake away. Beyond lies a narrow corridor lit only by my flashlight, walls lined with ancient electrical conduits and ventilation ducts covered in dust so thick it muffles my footsteps. At the corridor's end sits a forgotten communications hub, a room frozen in time, filled with vintage radio equipment, telegraph stations, and analog switchboards that predate modern satellite systems. The consoles are covered in dust, but several indicator lights glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the broadcasts I've been monitoring. Power still flows through these ancient circuits, keeping them alive in silent vigil. I approach the main radio operator console, a massive panel of switches, dials, and frequency meters that would have been cutting-edge technology half a century ago. As I adjust the tuning knobs, the voices surge through the speakers with startling clarity. No longer distant echoes, but present, immediate, as if the speakers themselves were standing in this room, broadcasting their conversations directly to me. Cabin 317 is sealed, sir. We found... Static crackles. Can't explain the damage. Passengers reported hearing... Another burst of interference. Missing since yesterday's crossing. No sign in any... The transmissions paint a picture of disasters hushed up. Disappearances quietly erased from records, incidents too disturbing to acknowledge officially. I cross-reference dates and details mentioned in the broadcasts against historical ship records, finding gaps, entire voyages with incomplete manifests, passenger counts that don't match embarkation records, crew transfers that happened without explanation. Some stories sink beneath official records, but the airwaves remember everything. Days blur into sleepless nights as I return again and again to the sealed communications hub, listening, recording, piecing together fragments of a hidden history. The broadcasts aren't random. They're chronological, replaying crossings in sequence, each one revealing another layer of tragedy. A family that vanished from their cabin mid-voyage. Crew members who reported seeing figures in restricted areas. Equipment failures that couldn't be explained by mechanical faults. And always, beneath the technical language and maritime protocols, an undercurrent of fear the speakers tried desperately to hide. The ship's modern systems continue functioning normally above. But down here in this forgotten chamber, time operates differently. I begin noticing discrepancies. My watch runs slow when I'm in the communications hub. Battery-powered devices drain faster than they should, and occasionally the radio picks up transmissions that haven't been broadcast yet, according to the timestamps, as if the equipment exists slightly outside normal time. My grip on reality loosens with each visit. I start hearing the voices even when I'm not near the equipment. Whispers in server rooms and electrical closets. Shadows move at the periphery of my vision in corridors I know are empty. Other crew members notice my deterioration. The dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden noises, my increasing isolation. But I can't stop. The broadcasts have become an addiction, a need to understand what happened on those missing voyages. One transmission stands out from the others, replaying more frequently than any other. A distress call from a crossing 15 years ago, a panicked radio operator reporting something in the lower decks, something that shouldn't be there. His voice rises in pitch as he describes sealed compartments opening on their own, crew members going missing, passengers reporting impossible sights, figures that appear in mirrors but cast no reflection, voices calling from empty rooms, cold spots that move through the ship like living things. The transmission ends abruptly mid-sentence, cut off by static that sounds almost like screaming. Silence after a scream is the loudest sound the dead can make. I search for records of that specific crossing and find nothing. The dates exist in the ship's schedule, but all details have been scrubbed from databases, passenger manifests deleted, crew rosters incomplete. It's as if the voyage was systematically erased, leaving only the ghost of its existence in this underground radio station. As February's cold deepens and the ship pushes through increasingly rough seas, the boundary between the broadcasts and my present reality dissolves entirely. I begin seeing the people whose voices fill the speakers. Translucent figures moving through the communications hub, operating equipment that hasn't been touched in decades, speaking words that echo from both past and present simultaneously. A captain with hollow eyes stares at navigation charts that show routes no longer sailed. An engineer frantically adjusts dials on equipment that shouldn't be powered. A radio operator, young, terrified, broadcasts the same distress call over and over, unaware that no one is listening, that his message arrives decades too late to save anyone. I realize with creeping horror that I'm not just listening to recordings. The communications hub exists in a temporal loop, replaying these tragic crossings endlessly, and my presence has created a connection between then and now. The more I listen, the thinner the barrier becomes. Equipment I touch responds to commands from the past. Switches flip themselves. Frequency meters spike without cause. And the voices, They begin acknowledging me, asking questions, requesting help I cannot provide. The ship's modern systems start experiencing inexplicable failures traced back to this sealed section. Network outages, radio interference, communication blackouts that last seconds, but feel like hours. My supervisors demand explanations I can't give without sounding insane. How do I explain that the ship is haunted by its own history? That decades of suppressed tragedies are bleeding through from a forgotten communications hub that technically doesn't exist in current schematics? On the final night before we reach port, descend one last time into the sealed corridor. The communications hub is fully active now. Every console lit, every speaker broadcasting simultaneously in a cacophony of overlapping voices. Decades of maritime tragedy compressed into a single, overwhelming moment. The translucent figures are solid now, moving with purpose, operating their equipment as if the past has finally broken through completely. The young radio operator turns to face me directly, his expression a mixture of relief and sorrow. He gestures to his equipment, to the endless stream of distress calls and incident reports. And I understand. These voices don't want revenge or resolution. They simply refuse to be forgotten, refuse to let their stories be erased by bureaucratic convenience and corporate image management. Memory persists in frequencies beyond human hearing, waiting for someone willing to listen. I make my decision. Using the ship's modern systems, I create an encrypted backup of every transmission, every fragment of conversation, every piece of evidence proving these voyages happened and people suffered. I upload it to distributed servers, anonymous cloud storage, places where it can't be deleted or suppressed. The ship's secrets will survive even if I don't. As the ship docks and passengers disembark, I submit my resignation and leave without explanation. The communications hub will remain sealed, the broadcasts will continue their endless loop, and the next technician who stumbles upon that frequency will face the same choice. Listen and bear witness, or close the hatch or pretend the voices don't exist. I choose to remember. For the families who never got answers, for the crew members whose disappearances were explained away, for every tragedy deemed too inconvenient to acknowledge. The radio channel continues broadcasting into eternity, a testament to the truth that some frequencies can never truly be silenced. Some voices refuse to fade into static, and some stories demand to be heard no matter how many decades pass or how deep they're buried beneath layers of official denial and corporate silence. The sea keeps its secrets, but the airwaves remember everything. My name is Adrian, 28 years old, and the happiest man alive just 3 days ago when we boarded this magnificent cruise ship in the South Pacific for our honeymoon. The midsummer heat wraps around everything like a humid blanket, the kind of tropical warmth that makes the ocean shimmer like liquid sapphire beneath endless blue skies. My wife and I spent those first days in blissful wandering, exploring sun-drenched decks, drinking cocktails by the infinity pool, watching dolphins race alongside the hull as we sailed through paradise. Every moment felt perfect. The kind of magic you hope a honeymoon delivers, but rarely does. But tonight, everything changed. Tonight, I woke at 3 a.m. to find the bed empty beside me. Sheets still warm, but her presence gone. The cabin was silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant throb of the ship's engines far below. I called her name softly at first, thinking she might be in the bathroom or perhaps standing on the balcony watching the moonlit ocean. No response. The bathroom was dark and empty, the balcony door locked from inside. A note of unease crept into my chest as I pulled on shorts and stepped into the corridor. The kind of irrational worry that surfaces in the middle of the night when you can't immediately locate someone you love. Our cabin was on deck 9, midship, a location we'd specifically chosen to minimize motion sickness. The hallway stretched in both directions, dimly lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. I turned right, walking quickly past identical cabin doors, listening for any sound that might indicate where she'd gone. That's when I saw it. At the end of the corridor, where there should have been a wall or a stairwell. Instead, there was a passage I'd never noticed before. A glass-walled hallway, transparent from floor to ceiling, extending outward from the ship's main structure like a bridge suspended over the dark ocean. Moonlight poured through the crystalline walls, illuminating the space with an otherworldly glow. And there, perhaps 30 feet ahead, was my wife. Walking slowly down that impossible corridor, her white nightgown seeming to float around her in the strange light. Love becomes terror when the familiar walks into spaces that shouldn't exist. I called to her again, louder this time, my voice echoing strangely in the glass passage. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all, just continued walking with a dreamlike slowness toward what appeared to be a door at the far end. I hurried after her, my bare feet silent on the glass floor that revealed dark water churning far below. The walls were perfectly transparent, offering an unobstructed view of the moonlit ocean on both sides. And I realized with growing unease that this corridor extended far beyond the ship's actual width. It jutted out over the water, like an architectural impossibility. As I walked, I tried to orient myself, understand how this passage could exist. We'd studied the deck plans thoroughly before booking, explored every public area during our first day aboard. There had been no mention of any glass corridor, no architectural feature like this anywhere on the ship. Yet here it was, solid and real beneath my feet. The glass so clear it created the vertigo-inducing sensation of walking on air above the abyss. My wife reached the door at the corridor's end and pushed it open without hesitation, disappearing into darkness beyond. I broke into a run, calling her name desperately now, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't rationally explain. I reached the door seconds after it closed behind her and grabbed the handle, yanking it open to find our cabin. I stood on the threshold of our own cabin, staring at the familiar layout, the rumpled sheets on the bed, my phone charging on the nightstand. But that was impossible. I just walked 50 feet down a glass corridor extending over the ocean. There was no way this door could lead back to the same cabin I'd left moments ago. I spun around, looking back down the glass passage, but my wife was nowhere to be seen. The corridor stretched empty behind me, moonlight painting everything in silver and shadow. I stepped back into the cabin, my mind struggling to process what had just happened, and found it exactly as I'd left it. Except the bathroom light was now on, casting a warm glow across the floor. "Darling?" I called, moving toward the bathroom. Empty. Completely empty. I checked the balcony, opened every closet, looked under the bed like a madman. She wasn't there. I was alone in the cabin, the clock on the nightstand reading 3:17 a.m. The architecture of ships can hide more than empty spaces. It can swallow the people who wander into them. Panic seized me then, pure and overwhelming. I pulled on a shirt and rushed back into the corridor. But the glass passage was gone. Just a regular ship hallway with regular walls and regular cabin doors. The harsh, fluorescent emergency lighting revealing nothing unusual. I ran to the elevator bank, jabbing the button repeatedly, my thoughts fragmenting into desperate scenarios. Maybe she'd gone to get ice. Maybe she was feeling seasick and went to the medical center. Maybe she was sleepwalking and wandered to another deck. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet at this hour, only the occasional crew member moving silently through their overnight duties. I searched deck after deck, checking every public area, the pools covered with safety netting, the dining rooms dark and empty, the casino closed and lifeless. I checked the medical center, the guest services desk, the observation lounges. No one had seen her. No one had seen anyone matching her description. At 4 in the morning, I reported her missing to the night manager, a calm woman who assured me that people don't simply vanish on cruise ships, that she'd likely return to the cabin shortly. But she made the requisite calls, initiated protocols, sent security personnel to help search. They were professional, efficient, and utterly unhelpful. As dawn broke over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I sat in the security office while they reviewed surveillance footage. That's when my world truly shattered. The security officer's face changed as he scrubbed through the recordings, his initial confidence giving way to confusion, then something approaching concern. He called his supervisor. They rewound footage multiple times, checked different cameras, pulled up embarkation records. "Sir," the supervisor finally said, his voice carefully neutral, "we have you on camera boarding the ship 3 days ago in Auckland. But you boarded alone. There's no record of your wife checking in, no boarding pass scanned under her name, no cabin key issued to a second passenger." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "That's impossible. We boarded together. We've been sharing the cabin. Check your records. It's a honeymoon package, booked for 2 people." He pulled up our reservation on his computer, and I watched his expression shift to professional sympathy. "The booking shows 1 passenger, sir. Always has. And the cabin, it's registered as single occupancy." The room seemed to tilt around me. I pulled out my phone, desperate to show them wedding photos, honeymoon selfies, any proof that she existed. But as I scrolled through my camera roll, my hands began shaking. The photos showed me alone, standing by the ship's rail with my arm around empty space, sitting at dinner with a single place setting. Every image that should have captured us together showed only me, smiling at the camera with no one beside me. Memory is the cruelest ghost, painting companions into spaces where only solitude exists. "This isn't real," I whispered. "She was here. She is real. We got married 4 weeks ago. We've been together for 3 years. She was in our cabin last night." The security supervisor exchanged glances with his colleague. "Sir, I think we should take you to the medical center. You might be experiencing—" "I'm not crazy." My voice came out too loud, too desperate. "The glass corridor." I followed her down a glass corridor that went out over the water. "Check your deck plans. Where does that corridor go?" More concerned looks. The supervisor pulled up ship schematics on his screen, showing me detailed architectural drawings. "There's no glass corridor on this ship, sir. Nothing matching that description on any deck." But I'd seen it, walked down it, felt the cold glass beneath my feet. I tried to explain, tried to make them understand, but every word sounded more unhinged, even to my own ears. A man reporting his wife missing when she'd never boarded. A man describing architectural features that didn't exist. A man whose camera roll showed 3 days of solitary vacation. They offered me medical attention, psychological counseling, someone to talk to. But I refused, stumbling out of the security office as dawn fully broke over the Pacific, the ship pushing steadily southward through waters so blue they hurt to look at. I returned to my cabin and tore it apart, searching for any evidence that she'd been there. Her suitcase should be in the closet. Her toiletries should clutter the bathroom counter. Her clothes should be mixed with mine in the dresser drawers. Nothing. Only my belongings, neatly arranged for a solo traveler. I sat on the bed as the sun rose higher, and in the morning light flooding through the balcony door, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. A hair tie on the nightstand. Not mine. I keep my hair short. Hers. A simple elastic band in her favorite color, the kind she'd absent-mindedly leave scattered around our apartment. I grabbed it like a lifeline, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that she'd been real and present in this cabin. But even as I clutched it, doubt crept in. Had it been there before we boarded? Had I brought it accidentally, packed among my things, carried it unconsciously as some talisman of the person I'd lost? And lost her to what? Death? Imagination? Some impossible nightmare where the woman I loved simply ceased to exist the moment we crossed the gangway onto this ship? The day passed in a blur of official interviews, concerned inquiries from crew members, and long stretches of staring at the ocean. Other passengers noticed something wrong. The honeymooner traveling alone, the groom without a bride. Some offered sympathy. Others gave me wide berth, as if whatever tragedy had befallen me might be contagious. As evening approached and the ship prepared for the second night at sea, I found myself drawn back to Deck 9, to the corridor outside our cabin. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and gold that reminded me too much of the emergency lighting from the night before. I walked to the spot where the glass corridor had appeared, running my hands along the wall that shouldn't have been there. Solid. Real. Absolutely ordinary ship construction with no hint of the transparent passage that had existed just hours ago. Yet I remembered it so vividly. The cold glass, the moonlight, the endless ocean visible through crystalline walls, my wife's silhouette moving ahead of me like a dream, dissolving at dawn. Ships are floating labyrinths where passages appear and vanish, carrying away the people we cannot bear to lose. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the cabin's only chair, watching the door, waiting for 3 a.m., certain that the glass corridor would reappear, certain that if I could just find it again, if I could walk its length one more time, I would find the door that led to wherever she'd gone. I would bring her back. I would prove to everyone, to myself most of all, that she was real, that our love was real, that this honeymoon had been shared by two people, not a delusion constructed by a grieving mind. But 3 in the morning came and went, and the corridor remained ordinary. Just another ship hallway with regular walls and sleeping passengers behind regular cabin doors. No glass, no moonlight, no passage leading over the ocean to impossible destinations. As dawn broke on our 4th day at sea, my 4th day, according to official records, I finally accepted what my heart refused to believe. She was gone. Whether taken by some architectural anomaly that existed outside normal space, erased by forces I couldn't comprehend, or simply never there at all except in my desperate imagination, the result was the same. I was alone on a honeymoon cruise, clutching a hair tie that might be all that remained of the woman I loved. The ship sails on through paradise waters, its passengers enjoying tropical sun and evening entertainment, while I walk the decks searching for a glass corridor that appears only in the hours between dreams and waking. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of transparent walls and moonlit passages. Sometimes, I hear the soft pad of bare feet on cold glass, moving away from me no matter how fast I follow. The crew watches me with sympathy and concern. The ship's counselor has suggested I disembark at the next port, seek treatment on land, accept that grief can manifest in unexpected ways. But I can't leave. Not while there's a chance that at exactly 3 a.m., when the ship rocks gently through warm Pacific currents, the glass corridor might appear again. Not while there's a door somewhere on this vessel that leads to wherever she went. I keep her hair tie in my pocket, a talisman against the growing certainty that I might be losing my mind. And every night, I wait for the hour when dreams and reality blur, when the architecture of this ship reveals passages that shouldn't exist, hoping that the glass corridor will appear one more time and let me follow the woman I love into whatever space exists beyond the edge of ordinary life. My name is Finley, 45 years old, and I spent 23 years as a commercial fisherman in the North Atlantic before my body gave out and forced me into this softer life as a night security guard on cruise ships. The sea doesn't leave you, though, even when you leave it. The rhythm of waves becomes part of your breathing. The smell of salt water marks every memory. And sounds, the particular sounds of the ocean, they stay with you like ghosts of a former life. This October crossing is a repositioning voyage, moving the ship from its summer routes in the Mediterranean back to winter operations in the Caribbean. We're taking the slow route across the Atlantic, and for the past 3 days, we've been wrapped in fog so thick you can barely see the bow lights from the bridge. It's the kind of fog that fishermen dread, the kind that muffles sound and plays tricks on your mind, making you hear things that might not be there or miss things that are. The passengers complain about missing their ocean views, but they're safe in their cabins, warm and dry, and oblivious to what fog can do to a person alone on deck in the middle of the night. I work the midnight to 8 shift, walking the exterior decks every hour, checking locks on storage compartments, making sure no drunk passengers have wandered somewhere they shouldn't be. It's lonely work, which suits me fine. After 2 decades on fishing boats with cramped quarters and constant noise, I appreciate solitude. But this voyage, the fog has made that solitude feel different. Heavier, more oppressive, like the world has shrunk down to just the few feet of deck visible in my flashlight beam. The bell started on the second night. I was making my 3 a.m. rounds on the starboard promenade deck when I heard it, the distinctive clang of a buoy bell, that hollow metallic sound that carries across water, marking channels and warning of hazards. I stopped walking, listening hard. There it was again, clear and close, maybe a few hundred yards off the starboard side. The sound came irregularly, the way buoy bells do when moved by swells, clanging when waves lift and drop the buoy on its mooring. The ocean speaks in bells and fog, languages older than the ships that cross its face. But we were 3 days out from any coast, cutting through open Atlantic in water thousands of feet deep. There should be no buoys out here, no channels to mark, no hazards except the ones that come with deep water sailing. I went to the rail and stared into the fog, seeing nothing but gray mist illuminated weakly by the ship's running lights. The bell clanged again, sounding closer now, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The old fisherman's instinct that says when something's wrong, even if you can't name what. I reported it to the bridge over my radio. The officer on watch sounded bored, assured me there were no navigational markers in our area, suggested it might be acoustic tricks caused by the fog, machinery, sounds from below decks carrying strangely through the mist. But I'd spent too many years listening to the ocean to be fooled by mechanical noise. I knew a buoy bell when I heard one. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same position relative to the ship. 3 a.m., starboard side. That hollow clanging carrying through fog that hadn't lifted even slightly since we entered it. This time I didn't report it. I just stood at the rail, listening, tracking the sound, trying to gauge distance and direction. It stayed with us for maybe 15 minutes, maintaining position as the ship moved forward, which made no sense at all. A stationary buoy should fall away behind us as we passed, but this one seemed to travel alongside, keeping pace at a fixed distance. By the third night, I was expecting it. I positioned myself at the starboard rail at 2:45, waiting in the fog with my flashlight off, listening to the muffled throb of the ship's engines and the whisper of water along the hull. The fog was thicker than ever, visibility down to maybe 10 feet. The ship's wake was invisible, swallowed immediately by gray void. 3 a.m. exactly, the bell began. Closer this time, much closer. The sound was so clear I could distinguish the bell's tone. A deep, old-fashioned sound. The kind of bell they stopped making decades ago when they switched to modern automated systems. I turned on my flashlight and swept the beam across the fog. And for just a moment, right at the edge of visibility, I saw it. A buoy. Traditional style. Painted red, though the color was faded and streaked with rust. It bobbed in swells I couldn't see, the bell at its top clanging with each rise and fall. Then the fog closed in again, and it vanished. But I'd seen it clearly. A channel marker buoy floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest coast. What marks channels in places where no channels should exist? I stood there shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. The numbed fear that comes when the familiar becomes inexplicable. In 23 years of fishing, I'd seen strange things. Fog banks that moved against the wind. Sounds that carried from impossible distances. Lights where no ships should be. The ocean is old and deep and doesn't follow rules we understand. But a buoy floating in open ocean, marking nothing, guiding no one, maintaining position alongside a moving ship, that crossed a line even I couldn't rationalize. The fourth night, I brought my phone, ready to photograph or video whatever I might see. I also checked the ship's navigation logs before my shift, looking at our GPS coordinates. We were exactly where we should be, making steady progress westward, in water showing 4,000 meters depth on the sonar. No anomalies. No navigational warnings, no reason for any marker buoys to exist within 500 miles of our position. But at 3 a.m., the bell rang again. And this time, when I turned on my flashlight, the buoy was close enough to touch if I reached over the rail. It bobbed there in the fog, keeping perfect pace with the ship. So close I could read the faded numbers on its side. A designation code that meant nothing to me, but suggested it had once marked something, somewhere, before ending up here in the middle of nowhere. The bell clanged directly beside me, the sound so loud it made my ears ring. I raised my phone to take a photo, but the screen went black. Not dead battery. It had been fully charged. Just black, refusing to function. As if whatever kept that buoy here didn't want to be documented. I tried my flashlight and it too died, leaving me in fog-wrapped darkness with only the sound of that bell and the knowledge that something impossible floated just feet away. I backed away from the rail, my heart hammering, and nearly ran into another crew member, one of the engine room workers coming up for a smoke break. He asked if I was okay, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him about the buoy, pointed to where it should be. But of course, when he looked, there was nothing visible through the fog. He suggested I get some sleep, asked how long I'd been on shift without a break. The way he looked at me made it clear he thought I was cracking up. After he left, I forced myself back to the rail. The buoy was gone. Just fog and darkness and the normal sounds of a ship at sea. My phone suddenly worked again, flashlight too. I checked the time, 3:17. Whatever I'd experienced had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The fifth night, I stayed away from the starboard rail. I told myself I was being professional, covering other areas of the ship that needed checking. But really I was afraid, not of the buoy itself, but of what it meant. That I might be losing my grip on reality, seeing things that weren't there, my mind finally breaking after too many years at sea. Commercial fishing is hard on the body, but it's harder on the mind. Isolation, stress, exhaustion, the constant presence of danger. It takes a toll. Maybe this security job had come too late. Maybe I'd already crossed some line I couldn't come back from. But I heard it anyway. Even on the port side, even inside corridors, I heard that bell. Fainter, muffled by the ship's structure, but unmistakable. It followed me through my rounds, a ghost sound that I couldn't escape, reminding me that something was out there in the fog, marking something I couldn't understand. Fear is the bell that rings inside when the world outside stops making sense. On the sixth night, the fog finally began to lift. Visibility improved to maybe 50 yards by the start of my shift, and the weather forecast promised clear skies by morning. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt a growing dread. Part of me didn't want the fog to clear, didn't want to see whatever was out there in the daylight where I couldn't deny it. I made my 3 a.m. rounds, reluctantly, approaching the starboard rail with every muscle tense. The fog was thinner now, swirling instead of sitting solid, and through gaps I could see stars, the first I'd observed in nearly a week. The ocean was visible too, rolling black water reflecting moonlight. And there, perhaps 20 yards off the starboard side, the buoy floated. Not bobbing now, but absolutely still, as if the water around it had frozen or the buoy existed outside normal physics. Its bell hung silent despite swells that should have been ringing it constantly. In the breaking fog and moonlight, I could see rust streaking its sides, barnacles clustering its base, and something else. Writing, not just the identification numbers, but words, painted in a language I didn't recognize, or maybe so weathered I couldn't make them out. I pulled out my phone, and this time it worked. I took photos, maybe a dozen, documenting that impossible buoy floating in the middle of the Atlantic, maintaining position relative to the ship despite deep water and strong currents. I took video, narrating what I was seeing, establishing time and location. Evidence that I wasn't crazy, that this was real. Then I went to check the navigation logs. The bridge was minimally staffed at this hour, just one officer and a helmsman monitoring automated systems. I asked to see our GPS data, claiming I'd seen something in the water that might be a hazard. The officer pulled up the ship's track, showing our progress westward across the Atlantic. And then his expression changed. "That's strange," he muttered, zooming in on the data. For the past 6 hours, according to the GPS logs, the ship had been stationary. Not drifting, not moving, just sitting in one spot in the middle of the ocean. But that was impossible. I could feel the engines running, see the wake foaming behind us, watch the bow cutting through waves. We were clearly moving, yet the GPS insisted we hadn't budged, that we'd been in exactly the same coordinates since 9 p.m. The officer started checking other systems, pulling up engine data, radar, communication logs. Everything showed normal operation, the ship functioning perfectly, making standard speed. Only the GPS claimed we were stationary. He called down to the engine room to confirm propulsion systems were operating normally. They were. He checked with the radio officer to see if there were any satellite anomalies that might affect GPS. There weren't. Some kind of glitch, the officer finally concluded, though he didn't sound convinced. The GPS will sort itself out. All other systems show we're moving normally. But I saw him looking out at the fog with an expression I recognized from my fishing days. The look of someone who knows the ocean is doing something it shouldn't, and there's nothing he can do about it. I went back to the starboard rail. The buoy was closer now, maybe 10 yards away, close enough that I could have thrown a rope to it if I'd wanted. It floated there, in the clearing fog, marking nothing, guiding no one, existing in a space where it couldn't possibly be. The bell remained silent, but I didn't need to hear it anymore. I understood now that sound had been a warning, telling me we'd entered some part of the ocean that didn't follow normal rules, where ships could move without going anywhere and buoys could appear to mark passages we weren't meant to take. The sea places markers for journeys we should never begin. By 7 a.m., the fog had lifted completely. Beautiful sunrise, clear skies, the Atlantic stretching to the horizon like it always does. The buoy was gone. GPS showed we'd suddenly jumped several hours westward to where we should have been. Systems all reported normal, no glitches, no anomalies. The night officer mentioned the GPS oddity in his log, but noted it as a minor technical issue, already resolved. I checked my phone. The photos and videos I'd taken were blank, files that opened to nothing but gray static, as if the camera had captured the fog, but nothing within it. No evidence, no proof, just my word against systems that said everything was fine. The crossing finished 3 days later, and I completed my contract without reporting what I'd experienced. What would I have said? That I'd seen an impossible buoy marking some unmarked passage in the middle of the Atlantic? That I'd heard bells where no bells should ring? That for 6 hours we'd sailed without moving, trapped in place by fog and forces I couldn't name? They'd have failed me on a psych eval, marked me as unstable, ended any chance I had of staying employed at sea. So I keep quiet and take my silence to each new contract. But sometimes in fog, on night watches when I'm alone on deck with just the sound of water and engines, I hear it again. That bell, distant and hollow, marking channels that lead nowhere we're meant to go. And I stay away from the rail, keep my head down, and count the hours until my shift ends, and I can retreat to somewhere the ocean's old warnings can't follow. The sea doesn't forget, and it doesn't let you forget either. Some sounds stay with you forever, ringing in the space between sleep and waking, reminding you that there are passages marked by bells in the fog, and wisdom lies in never following where they lead. Thanks for stepping into the veil tonight. If this story sent chills down your spine, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because every night we uncover new nightmares lurking in the shadows. Share your own terrifying encounters in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, some stories never truly end. This is Mr. Nightveil.